I just feel like we're really revving it up on the crazy over here. I just can't get past the fact that he asked one of his girlfriends to initiate one of his young family members into sex. What a sick old man. And why in the world is he preying on the 17-year-old groom out in the stable? And why in the world is he over here wishing and hoping and praying that he could marry his goddaughter who's 45 years younger? 45! Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Denise. Today we're going to keep going in the Mountbatten book, which I know for a few of you is an exciting video. This chapter is so good. So if you have been eagerly anticipating the next chapter, I can promise you're going to enjoy this one. I found this one very interesting. And I feel like with Edwina out of the way, we quit talking about Edwina's weirdnesses. Now we're really getting on to Dickie's weirdnesses. So it's interesting. I really enjoyed this chapter. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. All right. This chapter is called After Edwina because, as you'll recall, Edwina passed away in the last episode, and it was kind of sudden. She had always been in ill health, honestly, but she passed away in the night when she was on a trip, and she was discovered the next morning surrounded by all these letters, these love letters from Nehru, and I thought at the time that if I were Dickie, that would have been a real blow. So that's where we pick up in this chapter. The book says that on March 5th, a memorial service was held at Romsey Abbey, attended by over 1,000 people, followed 2 days later by another at Westminster Abbey, the music arranged by Malcolm Sargent, and attended by the royal family, prime minister, and cabinet. Hundreds of extra chairs had to be brought in for the overflow in the cloisters. Edwina's death had brought even closer together the two men whom she had loved the most. It had taken almost a month, but on March 18th, Nehru wrote by hand to Dickie. I was working in my office on the 21st February morning when the message about Edwina came through our naval headquarters. I was stunned and could not believe it. It was exceedingly difficult to connect Edwina with death. She was the embodiment of life and vital energy and joy. Edwina died as she had lived, a radiant figure, laughing her way through life's many troubles and bringing joy and healing to innumerable troubled hearts. It was our high privilege to have known her, and had her love and friendship. In this rather dismal world, she came as a star brightening our lives and giving us generously and abundantly a bit of her rare and precious self. There is no way for me to express the depth of my gratitude for her. I just have to stop right now. I mean, can you imagine? You lose your partner. Regardless of the fact that you and her had had a lot of problems throughout your married life, Dickie still held Edwina in high esteem. And here you are trying to get over the loss of this, and her boyfriend writes you and is like, we were so lucky to know her. We were so lucky to have her love in our life. Also, this bit about how she was just this radiant figure laughing her way through life's many troubles and bringing joy and healing to innumerable troubled hearts. At what point was she bringing joy to Dickie's troubled heart? She was a nightmare in those last years to him, constantly picking a fight, constantly raging about the house because of the menopause. Do you recall? And I just feel like she gave everything, she gave all the good parts of herself to this Nehru, and Dickie got all the trash. And yet he never seems like he lost much love for her over it. He seems like he just still thought she was the best. But he has such a weird relationship with her and her boyfriends because it says here that one of Dickie's virtues was his generosity of spirit. He had accepted Edwina's lovers during her life, and he was not going to reject them now that she was dead. Indeed, he felt a bond with anyone who had also loved Edwina. So I guess he wasn't offended by Nehru's letter. I guess that was the kind of thing he was into. Yeah, let's sit around and talk about how much we loved her. I don't know, that would just make me angry. That, here I am trying to grieve the loss of my spouse, and you want to hedge in, and share the grief. No, you don't know what it's like. But anyway, after Edwina's death, Mountbatten stayed in touch with her lovers and called on their support for the Edwina Mountbatten Trust, which supported various nursing charities and provided them with mementos of her life. Malcolm Sargent, for example, was touched to receive a very beautiful souvenir. He said, I shall always cherish it and am most grateful for the gift. Okay. I think it's wild that at her memorial service, her boyfriend is the one who wrote the music for the event. And that even in her death, here he is getting little prizes, souvenirs, and mementos of her life from Dickie. I guess I'm just never going to be able to wrap my mind around it. And I'm sure some of you guys are like, all right, we get it. You don't understand it. But I keep trying to grasp. I keep trying to find something about this that I'm like, okay, I kind of get that. I can't. I don't get it. I don't understand how these people functioned. All right, well, Edwina's dead, and that means the money's gone. It says here that Edwina's unexpected death changed Dickie's life in practical terms, with 80% death duties, and the remaining 20% divided 7.5% to each daughter and 5% to him. He thought of selling Classy Bon, and there were newspaper reports that a butler, chef, under-chef, and parlor maid had been laid off. Douglas Fairbanks wrote hinting that he could involve him in some land development plans in Bahamas, since he seemed that he was hard up. But Dickie said, I shall not be able to do things on the scale which Edwina and I could do together in her lifetime, but I'm not particularly keen on entertaining or extravagant in my tastes. It is true that when I finish from this job, I might like to take on some business appointments to keep me occupied and to replace the very handsome salary and allowance which I receive in my present job, but that is still quite a long way off. In the end, he did not sell the family house, Classy Bon, but he made sure that it paid its way, renting it out to rich Americans when not in use by family and friends. After Edwina's death, he made a point of going every August and most Easters. Edwina's death had drawn him closer to his daughters and their families. William Evans had joined the staff at Broadlands in 1959 and was to remain with Mountbatten for the next decade. He has fond memories of his employer, but he had no illusions about him. According to this William Evans, Mountbatten was quite controlling. He said you had to know how to eat strawberries. They had to have their husks on them, and the way you did it was you would make a hole in the sugar, fill with cream, and swirl the strawberry. Ditto, there were exact rules about how to eat a pear. Edwina just used to smile. He was very demanding, just pressure of work. Everything was coded. Telephones, the tooting of cars at the gate. Remember, he was a signalman. And we knew that if the phone rang once, it was for him, or Edwina, twice for Patricia, and 3 times for Pamela. Very sort of Captain in the Sound of Music type situation. He was always good fun, especially with his grandchildren. One Christmas he insisted I obtain a box of Beatles wigs for the grandchildren. The managing director of company had to drive down with a box. Mountbatten pranced around in a wig throughout Christmas Day. When he wasn't with the grandchildren, he was very lonely. But it seems to me, as the rest of the chapter will go on, I don't know when he had time to be lonely. It seems like there was always some girl just kind of hanging around in the shadows. And when I say girl, I mean girl. According to his age. But some of them were very young. We're going to read about one girl who's 17 years old. Interesting. He's like got one foot in the grave himself. What's he doing with this 17-year-old girl? Plenty, apparently. But he says that he found being a widower difficult. And he wrote to his daughter and he said, I know you think that I ought to be able to live alone and spend my weekends alone, but I feel so terribly lonely without someone. Not that he was without admirers. He complained to a friend, Grace Stevens, that, quote, it is curious that at the very time I am living a fairly secluded, hard-working life, that so many people who knew Edwina, but who I hardly know, should be descending on me. Well, I'll tell you who was descending on him, a real clan of crazies. Because listen to this lineup. Amongst those who took an interest in him were 2 New York socialites, slightly older than him. Mary Hoyt Weiberg, a great-niece of the Civil War General William Sherman, and Rhoda Tanner Doubleday, who had married into the publishing family. You guys, Rhoda Tanner Doubleday, she came up in this gem of a book, Trader King. And I am sort of surprised that Andrew Loney doesn't remind us or doesn't give us a little bit of a broader picture about who Doubleday was. She was a psychotic. She came after Edward VIII, saying and claiming that they had this relationship and that she really wanted him to remember that they had always promised to be lovers together in the end. And she just bombarded him with all of these claims that she is crazy as a sprayed roach. And I feel like we should have been reminded in this book about how crazy she was. But anyway, I guess he neglected to do so because now it's time for us to learn that also Olga Stringfellow was coming after him, and she was a journalist at the Daily Express, whom he'd first met in the 1960s. She was sort of a forceful individual, and Stringfellow later became a well-known faith healer specializing in sportsmen. She died in her early 70s, having drunk herself to death. So as you can see, the pickings are slim at first. When he first becomes a widower, he's got all these sort of older ladies pawing at him, but that really wasn't what he was into. And what he really liked was when some young pretty thing decided to pay him any mind. That really flattered his ego. It says here that attending the wedding of the future king, Juan Carlos of Spain, in May 1962, Mountbatten found himself hotly pursued by a princess of considerable beauty, and 40 years his junior. She announced that she was madly in love and determined to marry him, and caused something of a scandal by rearranging the place cards at the state banquet so that they were sitting side by side. What a Meghan Markle thing to do at a wedding. Anyway, he was delighted, and he said the whole experience was pretty good for the morale of a 62-year-old widower. But the person who had really captured his heart was a beautiful and vivacious Italian over 30 years younger. Blonde and with a stunning figure, which she showed off in very short minis, Sibylla Tomacelli was the daughter of the Duke and Duchess della Torre and had recently married Columbus O'Donnell. He was completely enamored with her and really thought that she was something special. And I think she didn't really know how to handle that because, as she says, he was such a glamorous person. I was flattered by his attention. She said he certainly had a crush on me. He made his feelings very clear. He was very special. We would go scuba diving and riding. Everyone loved him. He was good company and a very easy guest. He had kindness. He was always trying to help people. If you needed help, he'd do anything he could. I, too, admired and liked him hugely. He was a good-looking man. Nevertheless, he was 30 years older. And even though we had a very close relationship, it was never physical, and I was happily married. So, I believe her because I think that she didn't know exactly how to push away the very evident care he had for her. And I think that she was sort of in a difficult place because she knew that he had a crush on her and thought she was really pretty. But I think she kind of looked at him as sort of like this, great uncle or something. Just this really lovely older man who was just, the cutest, but not somebody that you'd be willing to throw your marriage away for. And I think that she wasn't exactly sure how to rebuff him because I think that he was always very kind to her and very nice to her. So it's like, well, he's not doing anything. He's not putting me in awkward situations, and I don't want to hurt his feelings. But it does seem like she didn't do much to shut down this crush that he had. She seemed always to be in his vicinity, and, he would write these gushing love letters, as we'll see. And she didn't exactly spurn his advances. So I don't know if it was just great fun for him to have this pretty girl and sort of have the fantasy that she would one day be his, or what exactly was happening there. But it's almost awkward how much he liked her and how much everybody knew. At a family wedding of the same time, while Sibylla was talking to Patricia, Roald Dahl, whom both Sibylla and Patricia had not previously met, came up to Sibylla and remarked, "I hear you're the girl the Mountbatten is in love with." Upon which, clearly seeing Sibylla taken aback by this comment, Patricia immediately added, "Not only my father, but my husband and son too." After one such meeting, Mountbatten wrote to her, "I enjoyed your visits enormously, and so did Pammy and David. In fact, Pammy, who is apt to be critical of my friends, told Patricia that she had rarely found a girl so beautiful as you to also be so nice. I more than agree with Pammy, and I count myself as very lucky to have found such a gay and charming friend. We all miss you and send love." 2 months later, he admonished her for not joining him for a weekend whilst the Queen was staying. "The Queen wouldn't have eaten you, and Prince Philip would surely have joined the ranks of your admirers. I can never thank you enough for your sweet companionship and friendship, which has meant a great deal in the life of a lonely man. Much, much love, my dear, from Dickie." He's just gushing as ever. Remember, I used to always do that with Edwina. I think that's just how he is, very verbose in his sentimentality. But it's all sort of cat and mouse. I mean, she knows how he feels about her, and she's just not hurrying to get out of the way. It says here that in February 1963, on a month's goodwill tour to Central and South America, Dickie stayed with the O'Donnells. Sibylla hired a speedboat, and the two went to Rose Island, a short hop from the Nassau harbor. She proved herself to be as reckless in a speedboat as in a motorboat, and presently succeeded in running us onto the coral reef, he wrote in his diary. After that, we had a lovely sunbathe on a completely deserted stretch of beach and embarked again in good time for lunch. What went on there? That evening they dined at the casino and then danced until 1 a.m. in the Bahama Club. Sibylla remained on Mountbatten's mind, and he wrote to her constantly on his trip. A postcard from Buenos Aires said it all. "I miss you and all the fun we had." 3 weeks later, he wrote again. "Sibylla, darling, bless you for your very sweet letter, which I found at Broadlands when I got back on the 22nd. All alone and rather depressed, and it cheered me up immediately. I loved my short stay at Galaxy very, very much, more than did I believe. I hated leaving. I miss you more than I should. I've not met anyone as lovely, lovable, and sweet for very many years. Write to me again, Sibylla dearest, and destroy this letter. All my love, Dickie." So, I mean, it's like, he's not exactly hiding his desperation for her affections. She did return his affections, although in terms that I feel that if I were him, I would feel rather snubbed by. She wrote back thanking him for a dress that he had given for her birthday, in return for her having knitted a sweater for him. And she wrote, "My darling Dickie, it's always fascinating to see what a man thinks a woman looks smashing in. The only thing I'm sure of is that the length won't go much below the knee. But she continues by saying, I wish I was your daughter. Daughter? That's not what he wants to hear. Although, he did have a weird relationship with that one daughter, so maybe. Anyway, she says, I would never leave your side, not ever for a second. I was so sorry to hear about your gastric troubles and of the forthcoming hernia operation. I know of a wonderful nurse that would love to take care of you, highly qualified. Her name is Miss Sibylla. I miss you, and I am looking forward to seeing you in April. All my love, Sibylla. Oh, she's really threading that needle there, isn't she? Because on the one hand, she's not rebuffing him. She's over here knitting him sweaters and my darling Dickie this, and I love you. I would love to take care of you. I miss you. I'm looking forward to seeing you. All of this. But then she says, I wish I was your daughter. It's like she doesn't want him to walk away because she enjoys his attentions, his affirmations, and his affections. But then she throws out these little anchors to let him know exactly where she stands. I wish I was your daughter. I'm sure that's not what he wanted to hear. It's just strange to me that she'd be so affectionate with somebody who she knew was deeply attracted to her, and tell us that she's happily married and tell us that it was never a physical thing. But if you're really happily married, do you need the affections, attention, and the affirmations of this man who isn't your husband? I don't know. All we have is her word. But anyway, there's a lot weirder stories in this chapter. I just think that's kind of a strange relationship they have. Bill Evans, who you'll recall worked for him, remembered how, quote, he loved beautiful girls. He was especially close to Sasha Abercorn. It was a view confirmed by John Barrett, but the only one he really deeply loved, apart from Edwina, was his goddaughter, Sasha, the Duchess of Abercorn. He told me that if he ever married again, it would have to be Sasha. You want to know how much younger Sasha is than him? 45 years. I mean, how? How could you find yourself attracted to somebody who was 0 on your 45th birthday? How could you find yourself attracted to somebody who's that much younger? Like, you have lived almost half a century in this world before she ever darkened the doorstep of reality. How could you have anything to talk about? And it just seems to me that, like, how could you physically be attracted to somebody who's so much younger than you? It just seems like you would just have like a taste of sickness to it. Well, that he didn't let that stop him. But you guys, the thing that is even weirder is that Sasha Abercorn was his goddaughter. Her father was Bunny Phillips. Do we remember who Bunny Phillips was? At the beginning of the book, ages and ages ago, when we started this book, Edwina had the love of her life, Bunny. Bunny Phillips was like the man she loved so much, and she was so crushed when he got married, and she knew that one day he was going to get married and that day was going to come, but she could barely stand it when he did. And the whole family suffered as she was grieved and was depressed over the fact that he'd finally decided to marry. Bunny Phillips has a daughter. That is the girl who he says, if I was ever going to marry anybody, it would be Sasha. This child who's 45 years younger than him. According to Brian Hoey, whose book was sanctioned by the Mountbatten family, Sasha Abercorn was, with Yola, the most important female relationship besides Edwina of his life, and eventually became Mountbatten's closest companion. Sasha Phillips was the daughter of Bunny and Gina Phillips. Again, I cannot stress this enough, Bunny was Edwina's great love interest in the early part of her life. Great love interest. And she was also one of his godchildren, so it's just, there's nothing healthy about this, I'll say that much. She was tall, slim, and highly attractive. In 1966, aged 20, she'd married James, Marquis of Hamilton, heir to the Duke of Abercorn, who had an estate a few miles over the border from Classy-Bon. Hoey was to write, Mountbatten and Sasha had become close in the years leading up to her marriage, but it was after she became Baroness of Hamilton, before her husband inherited the dukedom, that the relationship blossomed into the deep and lasting love that caused Mountbatten to reflect to his secretary, John Barrett, that she was the only woman he would ever have contemplated marrying after Edwina. He had professed love for many women, but he said he had never considered marriage to any of them except Sasha. For her part, how did she feel about this? Well, Sasha Abercorn would later claim that if Mountbatten had ever proposed when she was single, she would have accepted. Now listen, y'all, she was age 20 when she got married, so it's not like she had all these years to be single in which he could have asked her. And also consider this, he's over there courting her and having her as his quote-unquote companion, but she got married when she was 20, so it was in her teens that he was sort of preying upon her. I mean, sickness. It's a sickness is what this is. She said that it was a huge physical and spiritual attraction on both sides, and she remembered that the 45-year gap in their ages just melted away. They spoke each day on the phone, and she would often visit Broadlands, where the two would walk in the grounds or ride. He took her to functions at Buckingham Palace for a weekend to see Yola in Paris. What was going on in that weekend? Or she would accompany him to social events. The artist Derek Hill remembered them at one of his openings as easily the most attractive couple in the room, though apparently at first few would have guessed that they were anything but what they appeared to be, an uncle with his favorite niece. For her it wasn't the great passion one reads about, but a mutual affection and respect. It lasted 10 years from the mid-60s, and she credits the relationship with giving her great self-confidence. I know I became a much stronger person through knowing him. As with Sibla, when her marriage ran into difficulties, Mountbatten took it upon himself to intercede and try to save the marriage, drawing on his own experience with Edwina. He saw nothing unusual in doing so. For him, a relationship with a married woman was safe. As Sasha Abercorn had later reflected, he knew it could only go so far, and that's what he wanted, no permanent commitment. Well, there was many girlfriends after Edwina's death, and according to his daughter Patricia, they tended to be, quote, youngish, very pretty with long legs and small waists, rather Victorian figures really. Girls didn't have to be intelligent either. He could be quite attracted to somebody who wasn't that bright, if it was going to be just a minor flirtation, but all his real serious girlfriends were intelligent. I think what's really unforgivable is that many of the girlfriends that he trotted around with were the wives of men that he had served with. The way he would go about sort of extracting the wife from the couple is also very devious. The book describes that the couple would be invited down to Broadlands for the weekend, and the men then distracted by the offer of a day's fishing or shooting, or would have to return to work on the Sunday night and the wife would stay on until the following day. Sometimes the wife would come down on Friday and be joined later by her husband. On one occasion, the husband, quote, arrived a few hours later than he had anticipated, while his wife and Lord Mountbatten were upstairs together in one of the spare bedrooms. I could see the husband coming, so I dashed upstairs and I tried all the rooms until I found one that was locked. I called to Lord Mountbatten and explained the urgency of the situation, arranging to meet the lady at the side entrance. I found Lord Mountbatten's Labrador Juno, and I took her with me so that the lady could slip outside with her and go around to the main entrance as though she had been out for a walk with the dog. See, I would resent that excruciatingly. If I was part of the staff, having to cover for this person's moral failings, having to lie to this person's spouse about, where his wife was, or come up with these little concocted scenarios in which, she's just out walking, there she is right there. I would just feel filthy. And I would really, that would just bug me so much. This guy's up there screwing this poor man's wife. And, it's all just a facade. This poor guy comes lumbering up to the house, none the wiser, just bound out for a fishing trip. He's been lured in and offered, all these sportsman activities. Meanwhile, the wife is being used as a prostitute. Okay. Well, what was he exactly into? Because, when we read Trader King, there was a lot of weird things that folks were up to. Was this person as weird? I think we're going to begin to scratch the surface. Bill Evans, who worked for him, sheds some light on some of the more private details of his interests. All girls had their set dates, recollected Bill Evans. We all knew where to be and not to be. He would go out riding and then return to bathe and change. He would put them in dressing rooms next to him. They were generally women in their 30s, young wives, very beautiful, always slim. The thinner the thighs, the better. We knew to stay away. He had a settee bed in the guest room, which linked through to his room. He liked his women small-breasted like Edwina. I could tell when he was in nookie mode. John Barrett remembered, quote, he liked slim-hipped women with flat chests, very like Edwina. His ideal woman was the young Jane Fonda. He loved riding with a woman, which was almost an obsession, sort of a kink. His big turn-on was riding boots and jodhpurs, but only when they were worn by young women, with long, slim legs. Part of Mountbatten's interest was voyeuristic. Barrett noticed that he kept a viewer in slides in his bedroom and said, my curiosity was aroused. As soon as I had the chance, I looked at the slides. Every single one was of a young woman in riding gear, wearing high boots and spurs. There was nothing pornographic about them. The girls were fully dressed. But he obviously got a thrill out of seeing young women in boots and spurring the horses. He also kept 1 or 2 magazines under lock and key. They were mildly pornographic, but nothing dreadful. He told me he was particularly fascinated by the story of a riding mistress who made her pupils sit astride a wooden horse and whip them. Anything to do with riding turned him on. Whips, huh? Well, again, a plug for an earlier book, Trader King. The exact same thing these two were into. What is the deal with these weirdos? What is it with the whips? What is it with the subjugation? I don't understand. I do not understand how it gets there. Well, another young woman to whom he became close was Mary Lou Emery, aged 17. She had come to Broadlands as a groom in 1964 and would ride with Mountbatten several times a week. He had heart trouble and was felt that someone should always be with him and take care of his dogs when he was away. He enjoyed her company, and she was less deferential than any other member of the staff and a similar age to his eldest grandchildren, which just makes it that much worse. And they remained close even after she married in 1969. Yeah, well, that would never have stopped him. Their closeness and his generosity to her aroused jealousy amongst the staff and even rumors that her son was Mountbattens. The suggestion that he might be having an affair with Mary Lou was fed on the fact that, quote, whenever he went out riding with Mary Lou or one of his girlfriends, he wore a French letter. And all his close staff knew this. I had to look up what a French letter was, a condom. He tried to be secretive, but he was hopeless at it. He kept his supply of washable condoms in a little wooden box by his bed, which always amused the servants and caused much speculation among them. Washable condoms? What a horror show! Golly. He also always wore spurs when riding with a woman. And if he was going riding immediately after working with me in his bedroom or the mail, he would slip the spurs surreptitiously out of his drawer where he kept them, as though they were something to be ashamed of, and as though I didn't know about them. Another regular riding companion and visitor Broadlands was Philippa de Pass, whose husband Robert had served on Mountbatten's staff. She said, he also invited us to Classy-Bond Castle, where our children had wonderful holidays with his grandchildren. She said he was very good with the young, and we all had such happy times together. Robert and myself took him to a magic circle evening, and he caused quite a stir by producing an unusual pencil, which was in fact a pistol that I think was presented to him by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He fired it into the floorboards on the stage, and the poor lady at the piano had quite a fright. We both have so many happy memories of Dickie. He was a remarkable man, having had so many extraordinary careers, such good company, so interesting to talk to and be with. He always entertained us with great style. Mountbatten had a very old-fashioned aristocratic view of marriage, partly shaped by his own marital experience, of it being separate from love. As long as one was discreet, anything was permitted. One of his girlfriends, at his request, even initiated a younger member of his family into sex. Question mark, question mark, question mark. What? I'm sorry, did he ask one of his girlfriends to sleep with one of his grandsons? Is that what this is saying? What a sick, sick man. Mountbatten was also a client of the celebrated Madame Claude. According to William Stadium, who worked for her and later wrote her biography, Mountbatten, quote, was so discreet that the only place he would see her girls was in Baron Elie de Rothschild's private jet, circling the skies above Paris as the two old friends enjoyed a ménage à quatre. Is that different than a ménage à trois? Is that 4 people? I don't know, my French is pretty bad. But what? While Mountbatten, whose military nickname was Mountbatten, had long been rumored to have unconventional interests, Claude had no interest in outing him. Okay. In the early 1960s, while visiting Los Angeles, Dickie had met the 30-year-old actress Shirley MacLaine through her producer Mike Frankovich. That evening, Dickie wrote in his diary, I drove Shirley back in my car. She certainly is a very sweet girl. MacLaine, in an open relationship with her businessman husband, Steve Parker, was then at the height of her fame. Another guest, Christopher Plummer, remembered, after dinner, we were all marched into the screening room to watch a sneak preview of her new movie. Mountbatten and Shirley were 2 rows in front of me. His arm was around her, and tisk, tisk. Was it the boozy haze clouding my heavy eyes, or did I not catch sight of them spooning in the dark? Shortly afterwards, at another dinner which involved a party game of couples being tied up and then freeing themselves, MacLaine had been his partner, and he confided to his diary, I must say, Shirley's a very sweet and amusing girl, and we got on like a house on fire. In July, she was one of his guests for a party at Broadlands alongside Douglas Fairbanks and Rex Harrison, and was thrilled to meet Indira Gandhi. According to William Evans, she was a very bright cookie. She often stayed at Broadlands, or they would meet in New York, and she became a good friend. She often acted as Dickie's hostess, and would hold court with anyone from heads of state down. The affair went on for many years. They hit it off immediately, and she was number 1 for a long time. There were several beautiful and rich women to whom he was attracted. They included Christina Ford, an Italian-born socialite over 25 years younger than Mountbatten, who had married Henry Ford II, chairman of the Ford Motor Company, in 1965. After he received a picture of her on her 1969 Christmas card, he wrote to Sibylla, "She was wearing long, slim black boots over the knees in the photo! Exclamation point. She should join my lifeguards! Exclamation point." Why is he writing to Sibylla about Christina Ford? What is all of the cross love lives? Why are we discussing all the things with everybody? Another was Lydia Milhaud, a General Motors heiress married to Francis Farr, one of Wall Street's richest salesmen, over 30 years younger than Mountbatten, whom Dickie would see whenever he was in New York. He also remained loyal to Barbara Cartland, who was completely in love with him, though her affections were not reciprocated. Dick Huff remembers how, quote, "they met at least once a week and often spent the weekend together at Camfield Place or Broadlands. Barbara told me later, bubbling away, 'We're terribly fond of one another, almost lovers.' And then a shrill laugh. 'But not bad, my dear. No. We're both long past that.'" Barbara sounds a little unhinged. William Evans remembered that she would call in for lunch or tea in a massive pink chiffon, then vanish, leaving behind her a pile of books on health and homeopathy and a quantity of new vitamin pills and elixirs to try. Down the years, she recommended to him the remarkable properties of a great variety of elixirs, herbs, vitamin capsules, and royal bee jellies. One of the elixirs, a brown syrupy honey, he took quite regularly. Mountbatten would respond diplomatically to her various gifts. "I must say, I'm very touched at the expensive Christmas present you gave me of 7 vitamin E pills. I gather they are Vita E gels with the strength of 800 IV, he wrote in 1961. "I'm in the midst of taking them and look forward to feeling terrific at the end of the week." At Christmas the next year, he wrote to thank her for a book on acupuncture. "I must say, it is marvelous the way you find all these interesting medical theories." He must have been lonely, because I feel like it would have been so tiresome to try to return the enthusiasm for these pills and acupuncture and all these medical theories that she seems to have wanted to discuss and him to partake in as well. Her biographer, Tim Held, wrote, "Barbara Cartland talks about huge affection and admiration of Mountbatten, and claims that in later life they were much in love, and spoke every day on the telephone, and then each morning, to enable him to face the rigors of the day, he used to play her the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra recording of love songs sung especially for you." Another platonic friend in love with him was Carola Rothschild, a wealthy Jewish widow. She was part of the Warburg family, who had been business partners of Felix Castle, with whom Mountbatten had often stayed in New York. She was involved with United World Colleges, a charity in which Mountbatten played a prominent role as a member of the American Committee and benefactor. Pammy and Patricia had stayed with her at her home in South Carolina during the Second World War. Mountbatten had no compunction about taking advantage of her generosity, allowing her to pay for a swimming pool at Broadlands costing $17,000 for his 70th birthday, and paying for his trips to America. Carola was very fond of him, and they would sit for hours holding hands, but he never felt for her the way she felt for him, remembered John Barrett. In fact, while he was spending time with his girlfriend Sibylla, life in New York would be rather awkward, because Carola was wildly jealous and would listen in to his phone calls, and even mine, because sometimes he got me to ring and make arrangements for him. Mountbatten also kept in touch with his former girlfriends. Sally Dean, now married to John Connell, Chief of Staff at the American Air Force, whom she had met at SEAC, visited Broadlands with him in 1966. "Dearest Dickie, I hope to retain my shape until we meet again, and trust that you will continue to be as handsome and fatally attractive as ever. Love to you as always, Sally." Janie Lindsay had divorced Peter in 1946, and in August that year married Beaverbrook's son, Max Aitken. The marriage had not lasted, and they had divorced 4 years later. The following year, she married Robin Compton, and she and her husband often saw Mountbatten. Looking back on their times together, Mountbatten wrote in January of 1969, "Darling Janie, 25 years ago was the first time we celebrated your birthday together. So Wednesday is a sort of silver jubilee, and I send you all the very best wishes for your dear birthday. No other girl I know has retained her slim figure and youthful looks so much as you, and I think back to our 2 lovely years with undying gratitude for this memory. Bless you, Janie, darling, and all my love, Dickie." So that's the end of the exploits that he was getting up to. Now that Edwina is dead. Poor Edwina, but I don't know, you guys. This man seems crazy. I just feel like I don't know, you guys. He seems like he had so much going on in his personal life. You just wonder how he kept his job going. And the thing is that he wasn't retired yet. How does he have time for this kind of social life? And how can he possibly say that he is lonely? How could he be? It seems like there's a different woman in his bed every day, and all of them so shockingly young. And I mean, he's no spring chicken. He's in his 60s. And I'm not saying that that's, that he's legitimately on death's door. I made a joke earlier about, he's practically dead. He's not. He's only in his 60s. But it just seems surprising to me that he has such a voracious sexual appetite. It seems like he might be slowing down. But if you ask me, it seems like he's revving things up. And it makes you wonder how much stuff he was getting to when he was younger and in his younger years that we didn't get in this book. Because it was all about Edwina, and so we're focusing on her many dalliances. But I just feel like we're really revving it up on the crazy over here. I just can't get past the fact that he asked one of his girlfriends to initiate one of his young family members into sex. What a sick old man. And why in the world is he preying on the 17-year-old groom out in the stable? And why in the world is he over here, wishing and hoping and praying that he could marry his goddaughter, who's 45 years younger? 45. And I'm never going to be able to get past it. That is weird. That's weird. Let me ask you guys. I know age is just a number. Well, sometimes it's a pretty big number. Can you guys ever conceive of wanting to get into a relationship, a marital relationship with somebody who is 45 years younger than you? I just don't even feel like that would be a category of human being that you could be attracted to. They're too young. Even if they've reached the age of consent, right? I'm not talking about abuse of a young person. I'm talking about they've reached the age of consent still. What would you have in common? You've lived almost 50 years in the world. They wouldn't have any memory of that. How could you even have a conversation with them about anything relevant? They wouldn't know any of the references. They wouldn't know any of the things. I can't wrap my head around it. I don't understand it. But I haven't understood anything that Dickie Mountbatten has done. He's not a person that I have found easy to understand. All of his motivations are so shrouded, and I'm so confused by the motivations in his life. And that most of the time I can figure out when I'm reading a book, I'm like, okay, let me, try to position myself where this person is standing. Can I understand why they're doing it? And usually I can come up, I maybe don't agree with why they did it, but I can usually figure out their motivation, and see clearly why they did what they did, whether I agree with it or not. I can't even position myself. I cannot even get into his shoes and understand him. He is not a person I get. And I've just found him to be super confusing, which is maybe one of the reasons I don't enjoy this book as much, because he seems like such a question mark from every stance that I feel like, what am I reading? Do we know anything about this person? Even as we try to compile all these facts, they don't make sense to me. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys later, and tell me what you thought about Dickie in the comments. Do you get him, or are you as confused as me? Talk to you later. Bye.